वेलकम टू आवर नेशन स्टेट डायलॉग सीरीज। राष्ट्र राज्य संवाद श्रृंखला में आपका स्वागत है। आई एम डॉक्टर गीता कोचर, मॉडरेटर फॉर टुडेज डिस्कशन। Today it's our pleasure to have with us Mr. Avtar Singh Bhasin, who retired from the Ministry of External Affairs of India after 30 years of service as the head of the historical division. He has several studies on South Asia and a number of publications. His publications include a series, each in the 5 volumes on India's relationship with Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, and a 10-volume study on Pakistan. He has also published an annual series for the Ministry of External Affairs titled India's Foreign Relations from 2002 to 2013. One of his recent remarkable works is a 5-volume series titled India-China Relations 1947 to 2000. Today we have invited him to discuss his latest publication, Nehru, Tibet and China. The title itself suggests a historical perspective on India's engagement with Tibet and India-China relations. But let us hear more from him about his understanding and views. Very warm welcome to you in this Nation State Dialogue series. Let me begin by congratulating you on your wonderful book and academic scholarship. And start by asking you to give a brief overview of your book. The title itself suggests something like Nehru, Tibet and China. So our viewers will be very keen to know why you chose Nehru's engagement as the premise of the book, rather than India-China or India's engagement with Tibet.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for organizing this conversation and the trouble you have taken for all that. And we can start on it. I admire your question, but it is a rather simple question, simply because every foreign policy has stamp of the Prime Minister. Today, we say it's Modi's foreign policy. We don't say India's foreign policy. Similarly, in Nehru's time, it was Nehru's foreign policy. That apart, you will kindly remember, he was also his own foreign minister. There was no separate foreign minister at that time. So he was not only laying down the policy, but also executing the policy as he wished. So everything that he said, he could say it only as Prime Minister and not as in any other capacity. Probably no other man or no other, even if there had been a foreign minister, the stand that he took on various issues, the foreign minister by himself could not have taken. He would have consulted the Prime Minister. But here, Prime Minister and Foreign Minister combined in one. So whatever he felt like, he took the stand and there was no alternative to it. If he felt wrong, he said, okay, I will go ahead and see what it happens. For instance, on 8 December 1959, he said in a speech in Rajya Sabha that in hindsight, I realized that it was not a wise policy to have taken that position. And then he said, I have consulted this committee, Cabinet Committee on Foreign Affairs and other officers, and they politically endorsed my policy. But nevertheless, he said, no, there is a problem, but time will take care of it. When we come to that, maybe we'll be strong. Well, only a Prime Minister of his standing could have taken such a stand. Otherwise, there was the need, if you felt your policy is not correct, something is wrong, there was a possibility of correcting it. Next year, there was talk between Chou En-lai and Nehru, and at that gave enough opportunity to correct the past mistake if it was felt it was a mistake, which he felt it was a mistake. And therefore, that opportunity, unfortunately, was allowed to slip. And there you are.
I mean, I agree. I mean, there are certain things that, every time the Prime Minister is considered to be the main policy driver or the foreign policy is as the leadership is. I mean, that's one of the facts of foreign policy itself. But, in your book, you have mentioned a very close relationship between Nehru and Chiang Kai-shek, while emphasizing that after the establishment of the PRC in 1949, the old China was dead, and I'm quoting that. And it was time for India to adjust to the new China. Can you please elaborate a bit more on it? What had changed and what were India's challenges at that point of time?
Well, you're right. As soon as Chiang Kai-shek lost the civil war, he fled to, as you know, Formosa and establish a parallel government there with the help of the United States. Nehru dropped him like a hot potato, and he had no correspondence with him of any sort. He even did not accept the rather request of Mrs. Chiang Kai-shek for mediation between the communist and the Kuomintang. He said nothing doing, it is not possible, and it is not possible. So as far as old China was concerned, for him, it was out. But the policies which are pursued towards old China, they continue. He still expected the new China to be differential to him as the old China was to some extent. Because he had sympathized with the old China, he had a lot of connection with the old China. He had been to China in 1939 September. He did want to go to communist areas, but war intervened and he had to turn back to India. So he had no personal contacts with the Chinese communist leaders. And now there was an attempt, whether it was possible to have any interaction with them. The Chinese, new Chinese, were a different sort of people. They had struggled like hard time soldiers for 20 years in most trying conditions. They were army officers, some were generals, some were marshals, and they carried their designation or the rank with them. Marshal, somebody was a marshal so-and-so, some were general so-and-so, and they were impatient people to restore the glory of China. They had no patience for negotiation or wasting time on these silly things. They wanted the old China to be restored. Old China means China before 100 years ago. During the empire period, it should be the center of politics, not the peripheral, as the British time had made China to be, and the Kuomintang had made peace with that. He was very much against Kuomintang people because they had made peace with the situation instead of trying to cover. Now, if you look back, when the old China was there, the Kuomintang were there. In 1947, when we became independent, China took up the question of Tibet with us. We were able to talk to them. We said, look, we will not like to bypass Tibet when we talk to your Tibet. The Vice Foreign Minister of China, Kuomintang China, Dr. Ye, told KPS Menon, our ambassador, look, while this new treaty, which was under negotiation at that time between the Kuomintang and India, commercial treaty, in that we will like to make sure that Tibet is also included as part of China. Well, KPS Menon said, well, we can see whether we do it or not do it, or we will not do anything over the heads of Tibet. That apart, now here is a regime with which we could talk. But when the Chinese came and we wanted to talk to them about Tibet's autonomy, China point blank told our ambassador and their ambassador in Delhi that this is an internal matter and we will tolerate no intervention, no interference in these matters. But despite that, Nehru was so much given to Tibetan autonomy that he went on repeatedly saying autonomy of Tibet must be respected. The Chinese didn't like it. They didn't want anyone to be interfering in their affairs. They totally regarded this as their internal affair. The Shkapa mission, which had come from Beijing to talk to the Chinese, was held up in Delhi for a long time. They were waiting for him for all these months until October. He came to Delhi in February 1950 to go to Beijing. But he was stalling his going there. He was requesting China that let us talk in Hong Kong, because he knew when he goes to Beijing, his space would be shrink. He expected that China would agree to discuss the whole issue with them in Hong Kong, where they will have some maneuverability. But China said, no, it's internal matter and it cannot be discussed out of China. So it will have to be discussed in Tibet. When Shkapa met the Chinese ambassador, newly arrived Chinese ambassador, he also told him, you have to go to Beijing and only Beijing will talk to you, but you should be prepared for two things. Your defense will be our problem and your foreign policy will be under our policy. And you cannot have any separate relationship with foreign countries without our permission. And you have to go to China. He also gave him no space. Now, Shkapa, instead of trying to be in contact with Chinese ambassadors, he never got in contact with Chinese investors again. He was only in contact with the Indian Prime Minister, that is Nehru, and in the meantime, he was trying to find space with the Americans if they would be prepared to help. And the Americans told him, yes, we have got authorization from Washington, but they put such conditions which he could not fulfill. Because the Americans were very clear that without India's cooperation, they will not be able to help. And India was not prepared to intervene or help in any manner in this way. And therefore, Shikappa got delayed. And Nehru was writing on his behalf to Chinese, and Chinese didn't like it. So these were the problems that we were facing. The old China was no longer available, but he was trying on his behalf to talk to China. China said, this is an internal affair, please don't intervene, and we will discuss bilaterally with Chinese, with the citizens, but not to you and not with you at all. So this was the difference between the old regime was willing to talk, the new regime was not willing to talk. And this was a big change in the situation as compared to the past.
Yes. So what you are actually meaning is, Nehru was able to, have some good rapport with the Kuomintang government and not with the communist regime. So there's a huge gap between how the Chinese communists are, after the establishment of PRC, are able to deal with India, whether it was Nehru or later, but how we were able to deal with the prior to the liberation of PRC, we were able to deal with the Chinese. But having said that, while dwelling into the history of Tibet, you have mentioned in your book that, and I quote, sometimes his authority, and you mentioned China, China's authority enhanced to an extent that that is China, became the final arbiter in all matters of the administration, that is the Tibetan administration, including the Dalai Lama's succession. Besides, you also mentioned that the Anglo-Russian Convention of September 1907 recognized the suzerain rights of China in Tibet, while both the British and the Russians agreed to abstain from all the interference in Tibet and to deal with Tibet through China. So today, when Dalai Lama's succession is a huge issue for both China and Western powers, how do you evaluate the past and the present in this context?
See, that Anglo-Russian Convention recognized the Chinese supremacy, or you can say the sovereignty of China in Tibet. It's a matter of fact and given in the treaty. So I don't think I need to comment on that. But as far as otherwise China relation with Tibet was concerned, in the past, yes, the Chinese used to give some sort of recognition to the new Dalai Lama. The Amban was a very strong man, but sometimes he also compromised his position if he had attraction for the pecuniary things and also other things. So he would also compromise China. Now, I will just take one incident, that is 1904, when Young Husband expedition took place. Dalai Lama fled and went to Mongolia. He was there for 4 years, up to 1908. Finally, he decided to come back. He didn't come back straight to Tibet. He went to Beijing and petitioned to the Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager accepted his petition, but what condition and what she said, I think I would like to quote original than say something from my side. She accepted him. In restoring the pontiff, the queen conferred on him the title of our most loyal and submissive vice-regent, instructed him by decree that, quote, when His Holiness has returned to Tibet, he must be careful to obey the laws of the sovereign state of China, and he must promulgate to all goodwill of the court of China. He must exhort the Tibetans to be obedient and to follow the path of restitution. We must follow the established custom of memorializing us through the imperial Amban and respectfully await our will. This is the conditions under which he was restored in 1908 and he came back. So this shows how submissive or how powerful was the Chinese authority respected in Tibet, and even the Dalai Lama respected it also. So, but what happened in 1933, I think the 13th Dalai Lama died and the present Dalai Lama was chosen there. Now, in between, I know there was the Shimla Convention 1914, where the British had taken Tibet under its sort of influence, and Chinese were thrown out of it. So naturally, Chinese couldn't do, whosoever was appointed or selected incarnate or the 30th Dalai Lama, he took over, and the British also didn't do anything. But there is a difference. He has to get majority before he gets the spiritual power. And in the meantime, there was a regent. Now, in this case, when 1950 trouble started with China trying to liberate Tibet, the regent felt himself unable to cope with the pressure. And the 14th Dalai Lama, which is the present Dalai Lama, was asked to take over the responsibility of the Dalai Lama in full and discharge his duties. The Chinese were at that time not yet come to Tibet, so they also were trying to talk over the whole thing so that they could the control over Tibet or sovereignty over Tibet could establish. So in any case, this Dalai Lama was also accepted. And until 1951 October, when he sent a telegram accepting the 17-point agreement, Dalai Lama was out of picture. But after he had sent the telegram October, that the Chinese started talking about this man, and he continued to be in position after that until his ousting in 1959. But before that, in 1950, when the Chinese attacked and he had taken over the responsibility, he also wanted to have asylum in India, and he had requested India for asylum. India had agreed to give him asylum. I'm talking of 1950. But before he could come, Zhou Enlai warned our ambassador, Panikkar, look, if you give him asylum, our relation will come under shadow. So there's no question of your giving him any asylum. Panikkar said, look, we have promised him, and if he comes, we will have to respect our promise, but he will only have spiritual power, spiritual position, religious position, no political. So I said, okay, but we will request you to be careful and not allow him to come. And that was that, he left at that. India took the message and conveyed to Lhasa. It would be better for him to stay in Lhasa and give leadership to people, thereby hinting that he should not come, and he did not come. So that was the position that we had, but that the Chinese were having and the Tibetans were facing. Under these circumstances, China's position in Tibet was found after 17-point agreement, which was agreement only by name, because there were conditions which were not acceptable to the Tibetans. When they did not accept these conditions, the Chinese simply said, you decide. If you don't want to accept, you can go back home. We will just issue a telegram to the PLA and job will be done. Under this threat, the Chinese delegation, Nagwang, who was leading it, accepted he was asked whether you have the seal of your office. He did have the seal, but he said no. The Chinese made a special seal for him to enable him to sign the agreement, and he signed the agreement. The Chinese in Lhasa were very upset when this message was received. And when they contacted him, he said, but I have signed it. If you're not happy, send another delegation, which was not possible, but the Chinese would not receive it. So, and then only to make sure that Nagwang, who was leader, does not reach Lhasa, he sent him to go via the land route, which was a much more arduous. Other members of the delegation came via India, by air and all that. It was much easier route, but they made him sure to go by the land route from within China to Tibet so that it doesn't slip on the way. And then the whole system A whole process which they had taken since 17 point is lost to us.
But having said that, I would really want you to put a little highlight on Dalai Lama's succession today.
The Dalai Lamas are incarnate. They are not appointed. And the selection is made at the age of 1.5 or 2.5 years. This present Dalai Lama, the 14th, is already 86 and he is not immortal. What will happen? I can only say two positions. China will definitely find a boy in Tibet because always the Dalai Lama has been found in Tibet. In Tibet, they will find the Dalai Lama, put him on the, accept him. He will be only 2 years. There will be regent. Somebody who is pro-Chinese will be appointed as a regent. It is very likely that Tibetans in India might also find a boy and put him up as a Dalai Lama. The people here will accept it, but not the Tibetans in China. And the Chinese and the Tibetans in China will not accept this boy. This is a small matter. In my opinion, there's other part of it is much bigger. That is, now the Dalai Lama, which is a child at the beginning of 2 years or 2.5 years, he does not assume spiritual power until 18. That means there's a gap about 16 years between his selection as a Dalai Lama and his taking the power, spiritual power as Dalai Lama. 16 is a lot of time. And the Tibetans in India are likely, and the world around are likely to forget Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama's value is spiritual. The present Dalai Lama is sought after for his spiritual power. That means for 18 years, nobody will look for any Dalai Lama. Because the boy will not be ready to answer any question of spiritual. He has to be trained, and that 18 years or 16 years period is used for training him. And in the 16 years is a very, very long time in the life of man, and people will forget this. And the institution will be. Secondly, the Tibetans in India are no longer all who came from Tibet in 1959. Most of them have expired. And their second generation is here. There have been petitioned the Supreme Court that the government of India's policy was not to give Tibetan refugees or their descendants any Indian citizenship. The Tibetans went to court and the court said, yes, those who are born in India can be granted Indian citizenship. Most of these young people will get Indian citizenship in the meantime because they will find no future for them as Tibetans because they can't get any job, they can't do anything. So they will naturally look for Indian citizenship. Once most of them become Indian citizens, the problem is resolved. A handful of them will have no new interests, no refugees are coming at all, will not be accepted either. So therefore, the problem will solve in 16 years, in my opinion. Whether the Chinese accept this Dalai Lama or retired Lama, this problem will sort out itself with time.
But, talking about the border, I mean, one of the very interesting things which I read in your book was you highlighted that Nehru's worry was mainly on the Shimla Convention and the McMahon Line, and not about the Western frontier where the border was undefined. So considering that the present serious tension that we have with the Chinese is escalated in the Ladakh and the Galwan Valley, which is actually the Western border, how do you assess the position of the Chinese on the border issue? I mean, also, how do you look at the hesitancy or ignorance, I would say, of Nehru on these crucial issues that now are a thorn in bilateral relations?
Tibet was still in control of Tuang, which is Nifa, under the 1914 treaty. When 1914 treaty was signed, the McMahon Line put Tuang south of the line, which means Tuang was Tibetan name. and we gave it the name of Northeast Frontier Agency. So it was part of, by the map, India, but the British, after having signed the 1914 convention, did not take possession of this area. But in 1940, the British government had, rather the Lord Basil, the political officer from Gangtok, had gone to Lhasa, and he conveyed to the Tibetans that we will amend the border for the Mekmo line to go south of the Tuang, which means putting Tuang back formally into Tibet. But the formalities for putting it back, the paperwork was not done by 1947 when India became independent. So at the time of independence, Tuang or Nifa was still under Chinese possession, though on the map, by the line, it should be in India. Having said that, let me also add that Nehru himself, the government of India itself, had conveyed to Tibetans in 1948 that we will amend the border in Tuang in favor of Tibet. That means they will also agree to the retrocession of Tuang or Nifa back to Tibet. And in October 1948, the political officer reminded Delhi that having made this promise of restoration of Tuang, it should be done by waste time, do it quickly. When the government of India found the Chinese and Tibetans were creating a situation where China is going to occupy Tibet by hook or by crook, and therefore it was only desirable in the interest of larger security of India that this area, which by treaty belongs to us, we should occupy it. And just before the 17-point agreement was signed on 23rd May 1951, an Indian escort in April went to Tibet, occupied this area which was in their possession under protest of the Tibetans. But we said, this is our area and we will occupy it, and despite protest, we occupied the area. The mission in charge in Lhasa, who was Mr. Sinha, Sumal Sinha, he warned Delhi, Tibet in the long run, or this Tuang in the long run, is going to cause us lots of problems. That apart, India was bent on occupying it, and they occupied it. Later on, when the Tibetans informed Sumal Sinha, the Chinese had having come after 1951, they have been asking us for getting this area back. If the Chinese put any pressure on you or create any problem, don't think that we are party to that. That is your problem and China's problem. Sumal Sinha, unable to answer or say anything, he said, please talk to our political officer in Gangtok, Mr. Reshwar Dayal. But nothing happened. The Chinese kept quiet, and the government of India, of course, told Sumal Sinha, should the Chinese or the Tibetans want to discuss with you the border, please tell them to talk this to Delhi, because he had no authority to discuss this matter. So there the matter ended, and Chinese did not create any problem on that. But on the other side of the border, that is the western sector, there was a problem. When India became independent, it was marked undefined in the Survey of India maps. Subsequently, Survey of India printed these maps again in 1951, 52, 53, and went on showing this border as undefined. If you will remember, when the 1954 talks were held on Tibet, a brief was prepared in Delhi for the delegations to talk on. In that brief, among the disputed areas, Aksai Chin was included. Aksai Chin was included. It's a disputed area, but nobody took note of it. And the instructions that the ministry prepared for the delegation were that should Chinese insist on discussing the borders, we were not to discuss. And that a decision has already been taken between Panikkar, who was now ambassador in Cairo, but still dangling in the Chinese in the Tibetan affairs, and the ministry. And the brief that went to Nehru was that we shall not talk, and should the Chinese insist on discussing border, to break the negotiations. Nehru saw the brief and he said, we should definitely not discuss, and express our surprise that they want to, there's a problem on the border. But before, of course, breaking negotiations, should the Chinese insist on discussions, Delhi should be consulted. This is only change made by Nehru. During the discussions, neither the Chinese nor our side referred to the border problem, because our people had a brief not to discuss, so they were happy that this matter didn't come up. But very important point, while the discussions were going on in Beijing, Delhi sent a telegram to Ambassador Raghavan that 3 passes in the western sector be included among the passes that we are listing in the agreement. Ambassador wrote back, sorry, these 3 passes are along the Aksai chain area, and our mentioning these passes will inevitably lead to discussion on the border. Please issue instructions. Delhi said, no, there's no need to mention the passes, there's no need to discuss. So there was a problem which was confronting us, but we were avoiding it. Instead of facing it, we went and avoiding it. And you know what the problem was there. You see, Nehru had assumed our borders are what they are. As you rightly said, I have said in the book also, Western border did not draw anybody's attention. So it was since 1949, we were aware that Chinese are interested in it. In 1949, there was the Kuomintang government of before, in the last days, wrote to the government, wrote to the ambassador, asked the ambassador that we want to settle this border in Western sector. Delhi advised the ambassador to tell the Chinese that in this unsettled condition, this border cannot be settled, which means when the situations are settled, the border can be discussed. So we were aware in 1949, apart from the maps had made it undefined, we knew China's interest in defining this border in 1949 itself. In 1951, as I said, 1953, as I said, there was a clear-cut instruction, mention of Aksai chain as a disputed area. Nehru got into the feeling that our borders are what they are. He expressed surprise to to Panikkar in 1952 that Zhou Enlai, while talking about Tibet, various matters and all that, he was not mentioning about the border. How come? Panikkar said, there had been a couple of opportunities, but I myself desisted from mentioning borders. And he told Nehru that when I was leaving to take up assignment in Beijing, you had told me our borders are very clear and we will live by these borders and we are not to discuss. So since we have no doubt about our border, our taking up border question with China would mean that we have doubt about our border. And that was the hesitancy of Nehru all the time, that if we discuss the border, which means we have doubt about our border. And we have no doubt. Border is not your border alone. A border belongs to other country also on the other side. And unless the other country also accepts it, the border is not secure. No, even though Macmillan had drawn this line at our border, in 1935, October, he gave a lecture in London at the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Art on international borders. And in that, he mentioned that while working on this border, on this convention and this border, we found that there was a shortage of local knowledge. And given the paucity of time, surveys could not be conducted, and we drew a line, which means this was not a scientifically drawn line. Now, therefore, there was a need for drawing a scientific line after surveys. But Prime Minister took the position in November 1951 in the parliament that our borders are what they are, McMahon line is our border, and we will stay by it and will not allow anybody to cross it. This statement he made several times later on also. So there was no mention of the western border in all his speeches until 1957-58. And that too, first time it was Chinese who mentioned it. On this question of McMahon line, Zhou Enlai has been repeatedly saying, Chinese have been repeatedly saying that these borders are scientifically drawn. There's a need to draw the border on the scientific line by conducting surveys, and therefore we should stay together and do it. But Nehru did not do it. His hesitancy was based on, we know our border and they are our border. In 1952, before the Chinese-Indian talks on Tibet, Mr. Bajpai, who was earlier Secretary General MEA, and now he was Governor of Bombay, he had suggested to Delhi, please send a note to China, give details of your border. If they keep quiet and later create a problem, we can tell them of acquiescence or silence now, and therefore they should acquiesce in our border. But if they don't, we'll be sad but wise. We'll know where our position is, and we know there's a dispute, and we can prepare for that. But this was vetoed in Delhi. So we were living with all the time, with suspicion of our own position. That our position is not correct, but we will not discuss because discussion will not lead us to anything. Panikkar in a letter to Bajpai said, if we give our borders, these are our borders, Chinese, there are only two possibilities in getting a reply from China. One, that they will accept, which is very, very unlikely. He himself said. And second, they will say, okay, let us negotiate. And we will not like to negotiate. So it is better that we stay where we are. They know we are in occupation of this area, but they are not protesting. So therefore, we should stay by our position and not discuss these things. So there were opportunities after opportunities to settle the matter, or at least to discuss the matter and settle the matter, but we will not. It was not until there were before. In 1957, Chinese had constructed the road and issued a press note which made us aware that China has constructed the road. Now, if you see the protest, or the note, I will not call it a protest, the note that was given to China on this road, first of all, it should have been strong protest that you have constructed. If we thought this is our territory, there should be strong protest that this is our territory and you have made this road. The note was headlined informal note. Informal note, which means just ordinary that the road has been constructed. And then, surprisingly, the road says, your people who constructed, you have not taken permission for now us to construct the road. And secondly, that your people who worked on the construction of the road did not take visa from us. It was ridiculous. Now, the road had been constructed without our knowledge. We were not even aware. Since Nehru had drawn the line in 1954, but no action was taken to occupy the area or even unfurl a flag to establish our sovereignty. We claimed later on that we were sending patrols and they didn't see anything fishy. But the road had been constructed with thousands of people were employed. It was a long road in a very, very difficult mountainous area. And it could not have been hidden from any view. And if our people had been going to that area and doing patrol duty, the routine, they would have known it. That apart, when we sent a note, as I said, it was marked informal, not a protest note that they have constructed a road in our area which we claim as ours. And
That is interesting.
more than that, the note contained funny things like, please, you have not taken permission to construct the road from us. Your people who were employed on the construction did not take the Indian visa. And worse than that, Indian petrol had gone missing a few days ago. And we asked the Chinese, if petrol has gone missing, if it is found, please help us. Now, if we claim this is our territory, and we're asking China to help us in locating the petrol. The Chinese replied, yes, we have found the petrol. We have found them on the Aksai Chin Road, which is the Chinese area. And we are arranging to send them back. Our note that went in reply damaged our interest further. What the note said was, whether it is your area or our area is a matter in dispute, which needs to be settled. Now, when you yourself are again and again saying this is a disputed area, then why don't you talk? Why don't you talk? After the first patrol, which had confirmed the existence of the road had returned, the second patrol was arrested. Another patrol which went to Digra, it was also arrested. And the third patrol went in September 1959 toward the Konka Pass, was ambushed, and there were heavy casualties. And that created the furor. In 1958, Nehru had written a letter to Chou En-lai on the borders and the talks that are not helping us, this exchange and note. In that note also, a letter also, Nehru did not mention about the Aksai Chin Road the Chinese are constructing. He was only talking all the time about the eastern boundary, that is the McMahon line. Here we have found out that a road has been constructed in our area. We have given a note also on that, but Nehru's letter, written thereafter, does not mention this thing in letter to Chou En-lai, which means we were not very serious about this road. Nehru, about this time, said, I am more worried about Naga problem than about what the Chinese may do here and there. That we were aware of this road and ignored it is well established. Here are reports, and I have documented them in my book. I don't think I need to repeat again. Nehru had agreed to live by this road. And later on he said, well, this is a road anybody can come and go. And then he also accepted, okay, the road can be there, but it should be used for civilian purposes. It is not the question of use of road. The question is, a road has been constructed in your territory, which you claim to be your territory. So you have to protest, and that how it is used is a second matter. But he was not worried the Chinese had constructed it. Later on, when our Shadi affair, Mr. P.K. Banerjee mentioned to Chou En-lai about this road, he said, what are you talking? We were constructing roads for 4 or 5 years, and you didn't know it. And yet you claim it is your territory. He had no answer. So this is the funny situation that was created. We were ourselves creating it. We were saying it is a disputed area. We have yet to decide to whom it belongs. And we are asking China to help us in locating our people in their territory claimed by us. What is wise decision? No, how Nehru was acting like that, I cannot say. Something happened. See, I take you back to 1946, what Maulana Azad said about him. And after he had given a press conference on the cabinet mission plan, and which created a lot of furor. I will read out to you Maulana Azad's comments on him. Maulana Azad said in 1946, his nature is, however, such that he often acts on impulse. As a rule, he is open to persuasion, but sometimes he makes up his mind without taking all the facts into consideration. Once he has done so, he tends to go ahead regardless of what the consequence may be. And this was probably one of those occasions when he went ahead, having taken a stand that this is our border, not to be discussed, and irrespective of the consequences, we went on and on and on and on until you know what happened. If I may go a little further, in January 1962, I'm not talking 1962, U Nu was a former prime minister of Myanmar. He was on a pilgrimage out of India. Nehru met him in Varanasi. What did U Nu told him? He said, look, both Zhou Enlai and Chen Ji, the foreign minister, are very keen to discuss the border with your satellites. Please go and settle the matter. They say you are asking impossible conditions to be fulfilled. That all area with the Chinese had occupied after 1957 should be vacated. How can they vacate this area? You please go and talk to them. Now, when U Nu told him this thing, he was only reciprocating the gesture which Nehru had shown him in 1956. Nehru advised same U Nu in 1956 when he had a border problem with China. Please go to China, settle the matter by give and take. And don't take a rigid position, because once rigidity comes, settlement cannot be made. Well, he should apply the same advice which he gave to him. On himself also, there would be no problem. But he only gave advice to others, but did not follow his own advice to himself. In fact, in 1959, Khrushchev told our ambassador for PM's information that a tranquil border is much more important than this piece of territory here and there. And he gave the example of Soviet Union itself. He said, we had a problem with Iran on certain areas. To settle the matter, we gave away that land to Iran and settled the matter, so we have a tranquil border now. But this didn't have any impact on that. We went on saying the same thing, this is our territory and we will not budge from it. Now, 1957 road had been constructed. That he accepted. About the presence of Chinese in other areas of Aksai Chin, he said they came to other areas only after 1957. So what was the evidence? No paper evidence. He says, our patrol met the Chinese patrol at Shublung only in 1957. And therefore, they came to the rest of the area of Aksai Chin only after 1957. Well, if you put the question other way around, the Chinese could as well say, our patrol met your patrol for the first time, and therefore you came here in 1957 and after 1957. This was hardly an evidence on which the border settlements are made.
So what you're actually implying is that there was a dispute, there was chances that we could have settled the border, and probably the conditions that have developed today would not have developed if Nehru would have taken a proactive stand to, talk to the Chinese and resolve this issue. But the newly elected president of Tibetan government in exile, Khenpo Tsering, is talking about renegotiating with the Chinese, after a decade or so. While you have cited many occasions in your book about negotiations between Dalai Lama and China. So how do you see it will impact the future of Tibet or India-China border problem? Or do you see any future resolution of the Tibetan problem?
I don't see any resolution of the border problem linked to Dalai Lama. It's independent of Dalai Lama. There's nothing to do with Dalai Lama. Whether he comes, goes, or new Dalai Lama comes, it is hardly important. Even Dalai Lama or the Tibetan government, when it was still in the quote-unquote independent 1948-47, you know what happened at that time? In 1947 October, 2 months after independence, the Chinese government sent a note to India, to the Prime Minister himself, asking for retrocession of the Tibetan areas which had in the past been gradually incorporated in India by the British. And they wanted those areas to be returned back to Tibet. What were those areas? Sikkim, Bhutan, Darjeeling, Ladakh, and many more. And Nehru had later on remarked that if these areas were returned to Tibet, India's border would have come down to the Ganga. So Tibet would not have been very easy to deal with if they had been there as an independent nation and asking for all these territories. Things would not have been as simple. Of course, they were poor people when the Chinese communism came and the revolution came and the new China came. They were now struggling for their existence and they forgot that problem. But if they had no danger from China, then Tibetan government or Tibetans as such would not have been easy to deal with. It is our misperception that it would be easier if Tibet had stayed on and China had not interfered or old China had interfered. These Tibetans would not have let us have a peace either when asking for such vast areas for intersection. So this Dalai Lama question is totally different from border areas. Border areas are now independent of all this. We have to recognize where we went wrong. And we went wrong all the way. Chinese had offered to accept the McMahon line until 1985 or something like that. They made this offer to Nehru in 1960. When Vajpayee went as foreign minister in 1979, they repeated the offer. In 1980, again, to Indian journalists, they offered the same solution. In 1980, Mrs. Indira Gandhi was back in power. Narasimha Rao made a statement in reference to this interview of the Indian journalist. He said, since the Chinese are willing to settle in the eastern sector to our satisfaction, we are willing to have settlement in eastern sector. But he didn't talk of the western sector. And Chinese offer was package. You accept this, we accept this. Otherwise, we don't accept anything. As far as Vajpayee is concerned, when he went as foreign minister, he could not have responded immediately. He took note of it. And it was organized that next year Huang Hua, who was the foreign minister of China, would come to Delhi and the tap will be continued. When Vajpayee returned, he made a report to the cabinet and it was also discussed in the parliament. Maybe the government at that time under Morarji would have decided, let us have a settlement or whatever it is. But the government fell in the next 2 months. And the Janata government could not take any position on this offer of accepting this or that. But in 1980, the offer was repeated, but Narasimha Rao's response was on the eastern sector. But my problem is here that since Indira Gandhi was in power, what her father could not accept, she could not accept. Maybe if there had been another prime minister, the result could have been different, but definitely not with Mrs. Gandhi around. And thereafter, for a number of years, as you know, it was Congress governments and the border never came up for discussion. In 1988, when Rajiv Gandhi went, they put the border question in the freezer. It suited China because they were in occupation of all the area that they wanted. It was we who were the aggrieved party, if at all there was a grievance. And we should have asked for a negotiation. Rajiv Gandhi chose an easier way of not discussing at all and putting it in the freezer. Let us just have other relations. Other relations suited China. They had a trade, we were flourishing and we were talking all about it. 80 billion, 90 billion. What was this trade? All in favor of China. We were heavily running deficit with China on trade. Out of 90 million or 80 million, 60 to 65% trade was against us, but was not in our favor, but in China's favor. And China was happy to continue trade relations, put the border under freeze. Since 2003, when Vajpayee went, the border was placed under the special representative to talk about border settlement. I think up to 2020 or so, or no, sorry, 19, there had been 22 meetings between the special representatives, but without result. Obviously, the whole thing is stuck on the border. What should be done in the western sector? We haven't taken successively this position. This is our border. This is our territory. How does any government go back? This is not our territory. How does any government take a position that we are willing to accept Chinese, this part of the territory of Chinese? In 1960s it was easy, but today, given a fractious politics, even if we accept that this is our stand was wrong and we should correct it and agree to the exchange, which Chinese are still not prepared because they are claiming both areas. Do you think any government in Delhi will have easy time? People will say, oh, but Nehru said for India, Modi has given away. No government can now accept a quid pro quo solution even. And China is sitting pretty. Today, we are fighting on perception, a foot here or a foot there. We have lost thousands of kilometers. That nobody is bothered. But we are bothered about, we were 6 feet here and 2 feet there. And China were 1 feet here and half inch there. This is the struggle, this is the dispute today. And having lost thousands, nobody is bothered. It is very unfortunate. So when I, 1962, had offered Nehru, let us, your officers meet and settle on a demilitarized zone so that there is no border dispute and we should have checkpost agreed points. But somehow Nehru did not agree. And no line of exit control exists either on the ground or on any map or on any piece of paper. You can say, I was there, somebody else say, I was here. That's all. So that is the situation which we landed ourselves, and I do not know any way how we can get out of it. Or any government can even think of it.
I think the present negotiations are taking place.
Which I mentioned in my book at the end, that the only way is to open all the archives, all, without keeping a piece of paper back. Let people know what was the correct position, who was wrong and who was right. And then, if people are aware of all the facts and they are educated enough, then there is a possibility of a solution by giving up some land. Today, we are in the most difficult situation. Our position in western sector is what it is known to everybody. In the eastern sector also, this sword of Damocles hanging on Arunachal Pradesh, the Chinese are claiming it also. So where are we? We have landed ourselves in most unenviable position by our own actions, by own policies, by own mistakes. Whom should we blame?
No, I think the negotiations that are taking place on the border right now are very crucial, because even if the opposition are saying that we have lost thousands of kilometers, there are pertinent issues left by the history. I mean, we have to really go back and look at where the fault lines were, how we had problems in the past, and how these things have evolved into a complex problem now. I mean, you are very right in saying that maybe Dalai Lama is not the problem in our border problem. But yes, still, we have to deal with the situation of Tibet as well. I mean, that is also one crucial aspect, because geopolitically, where our borders link with China, whether it links with the Tibet area, the autonomous region that we're talking about, or ahead of it. And even the inner, you have mentioned in your book about the inner Tibet and outer Tibet. I mean, these will also change the politics of how we are going to negotiate. But anyway, thank you very much. For a great pleasure listening to you and talking to you, Mr. Avtar Singh Ji. And hope we continue our interactions. Thank you very much. To our viewers, please keep watching our program and keep learning. Namaskar.
Namaskar, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. And I hope my words had some added to your clarification of the issue or doubts. And I only thank once again. And thank you. Namaskar.